The leather satchel weighed heavy against Willa Vaughn's hip as her mare picked careful steps through Devil's Canyon, where 3 weeks prior outlaws had ambushed a freight wagon and left 2 men bleeding in the dust. She was 22 years old, had been riding this mail route for 8 months, and every man in Cherry Creek, Nevada, told her she was a fool for doing it. The morning sun beat down on the red rock walls rising on either side of her, and somewhere in the distance, a buzzard circled lazy patterns against the endless blue sky. It was April 1882, and Willa had 47 letters, 3 parcels, and 1 small package wrapped in brown paper that needed delivering to the mining camps, scattered across territory so dangerous that the previous 4 mail carriers had quit rather than risk their necks. She touched the revolver at her waist, more for reassurance than anything else. Her father had taught her to shoot before he died of fever 2 winters back, leaving her and her mother with nothing but debts and the small house on the edge of town. The postmaster, a gray-haired man named Clemens who had known her father, offered her the route when no one else would take it. The pay was better than washing laundry or working at the boarding house, and Willa discovered she had a taste for the solitude of the open country, even if that country wanted to kill her. The canyon narrowed ahead, and Willa slowed her mare, a steady sorrel named Ginger who had more sense than most people Willa knew. The walls pressed close enough that she could have touched both sides if she stretched out her arms. This was the worst part of the route, where anyone with bad intentions could wait above and pick off a rider like shooting fish in a barrel. She held her breath, listening for anything beyond the clip of Ginger's hooves on stone and the whisper of wind through the rocks. Nothing came. She made it through the canyon and out into the wider valley beyond, where scrub brush clung to sandy soil, and the occasional Joshua tree raised twisted arms toward heaven. The first stop was a small mining operation called the Silver Bell, run by a family from Missouri who panned for silver in a played-out claim that still yielded enough to keep them hoping. Willa delivered their letters, accepted a cup of water and a biscuit from Mrs. Henderson, and rode on. By midday, she had covered half her route, stopping at 3 more camps and 1 isolated ranch house where an old prospector lived alone with his mule. The sun climbed higher, turning the landscape into a furnace, and Willa drained her second canteen. She still had the northern camps to reach, which meant riding through Comanche Flats, an expanse of open ground that offered no cover and no shade. 2 months ago, a group of drifters had tried to rob a stage-coach there. The driver fought them off, but the memory made everyone nervous. Willa urged Ginger into a steady trot, wanting to cross the flats quickly. The heat shimmered off the ground, turning distant rocks into wavering mirages. Her shirt stuck to her back with sweat, and dust coated her throat. She was halfway across when she spotted the rider. He came from the east, moving fast, and Willa's hand went to her revolver. But as he drew closer, she recognized the big buckskin horse and the tall figure in the saddle. Thomas Langford, the foreman from the Double R Ranch, the largest cattle operation in the territory. She had seen him in town a handful of times, usually buying supplies or talking business with the cattlemen at the saloon. He was maybe 26 or 27, with dark hair that needed cutting and a face weathered by sun and wind. Word was he had come from Texas 3 years back and worked his way up from cowhand to foreman through sheer competence and a willingness to do whatever job needed doing. He reined in his horse when he reached her, touching the brim of his hat in greeting. "Miss Vaughn, Mr. Langford." Willa kept Ginger moving, not wanting to lose time. He turned his horse to ride alongside her. "You heading to the northern camps? That is where the mail goes. You hear about the trouble up that way." Willa felt a prickle of unease. "What trouble?" raiders hit the Murphy claim last night. Stole their supplies, ran off their horses. Nobody got hurt, but the Murphys are saying they are pulling out, heading back to California. The Murphy claim was her second to last stop, a small operation worked by two brothers who had never caused anyone any problems. Willa frowned. I have mail for them. I figured you would. Thomas shifted in his saddle, and she noticed the rifle in the scabbard on his horse, the way his eyes kept scanning the horizon. That is why I rode out to find you. Those raiders might still be around, and you should not be out here alone. Pride flared hot in Willa's chest. I have been riding this route for 8 months. I do not need a nursemaid. I never said you did. His voice stayed even, but she caught something in his tone, a respect that cooled her anger. But 8 months or 8 years, raiders do not care. They see a lone rider carrying mail. They might figure there is something worth taking. And I would bet my last dollar they have not run into anyone like you before. Anyone like me. Someone who does not turn back when things get hard. He looked at her directly then, his eyes a startling blue-gray in his sun-darkened face. The men in town talk about you. They say you are either crazy or the bravest person in the territory. I rode out here to see which one it was. And what is your conclusion? A slow smile crossed his face. I am still deciding. Despite herself, Willa felt an answering smile tug at her lips. Well, Mr. Langford, you are welcome to ride along if it makes you feel useful, but I am delivering this mail whether you come or not. I expected nothing less. They rode together across the flats, and Willa found herself hyper-aware of his presence beside her. He sat his horse with the easy grace of someone who had spent more time in the saddle than on foot, and he did not fill the silence with needless chatter. When they reached the broken ground on the far side of the flats, he guided them through a different path than she usually took, one that offered more cover and better vantage points. You know this country well, Willa observed. Been riding it for 3 years. You learn the land or the land teaches you, usually the hard way. He pointed to a cluster of rocks ahead. We will stop there, let the horses rest before we push on to the Murphy place. They dismounted in the shade of the rocks, and Thomas pulled out his canteen, offering it to Willa. She hesitated, then accepted, taking a long drink of water that tasted faintly of metal and leather. He watched her with those steady eyes, and she found herself wanting to know more about him. Why did you leave Texas? The question came out before she could stop it. He took his canteen back, drank, then wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Family trouble. My father had ideas about what I should do with my life, and I had different ones. Seemed easier to head west and make my own way. Do you regret it, some days? He looked out at the vast expanse of Nevada spread before them, all rock and sand and endless sky. But mostly no. Out here, a man is what he makes of himself, not what his family name says he should be. I imagine you understand something about that. Willa did. Her father had been a dreamer, always chasing the next big opportunity, never content with steady work. He had loved her and her mother, but his choices had left them with nothing when he died. Taking the mail route had been Willa's way of proving she could be different, could be dependable and strong. My father died owing money to half the town, she said quietly. I took this job because it paid enough to settle the debts and keep a roof over my mother's head. Everyone said I would quit after the first week, but you did not. No. She met his eyes. I do not quit. I can see that. Something in his expression shifted, became warmer. For what it is worth, I think you are the bravest person I know. The words hit her harder than they should have, carrying a weight of sincerity that made her throat tight. She had been called foolish, reckless, stubborn, but never brave. Not like this, not with such simple honesty. Thank you, she managed. They remounted and continued toward the Murphy claim, arriving just before sunset. The camp was in disarray, with scattered belongings and clear signs of a hasty search. The Murphy brothers, Jack and Daniel, were packing what remained of their possessions onto 2 mules. "Miss Vaughn," Jack said when he saw her. He was the older of the two, a stocky man with a thick beard. "You should not have come. It is not safe. I have your mail." Willa handed over 2 letters and a small parcel. "I am sorry about what happened." Daniel, younger and thinner, shook his head bitterly. "We tried to make a go of it, but this country does not want us here. Those raiders knew exactly what they were doing. They took everything we needed to keep working the claim." Thomas spoke up. "You see who they were." 5 of them, faces covered. "They came just after dark, had guns on us before we knew what was happening." Jack spat in the dust. "They kept asking if we had found anything, like they thought we were sitting on a fortune. We are barely scraping by." "Which way did they head?" "North, toward the hills." Thomas exchanged a glance with Willa, and she knew they were thinking the same thing. North was where her last 2 stops were located, including the largest mining camp on her route, a place called Redemption that housed nearly 40 miners. "We need to warn them," Willa said. Jack looked alarmed. "You cannot ride up there now. It will be full dark soon, and if those raiders are still around, you will be riding right into them. Then we will have to be careful." Willa checked her revolver, making sure it was loaded. Thomas nodded. "The Murphys are right about one thing. We should not travel in the dark. There is an old line shack about 2 miles east of here. We can hole up there for the night, then ride for Redemption at first light." It made sense, even though Willa hated the delay. The mail was supposed to be delivered, but getting herself killed would not help anyone. She agreed, and after bidding the Murphy brothers farewell and safe travels, she and Thomas rode toward the line shack. Night fell fast in the desert, the temperature dropping as the sun disappeared. By the time they reached the shack, a ramshackle structure built years ago for cowboys working the range, stars filled the sky in a brilliant carpet of light. Thomas unsaddled the horses while Willa checked the inside of the shack. It was bare except for a few old blankets and a rusted stove, but it would keep them out of the wind. They made a small fire outside, just enough to heat coffee and warm some beans Thomas had in his saddlebag. They ate in companionable silence, and Willa realized she felt more at ease with this man than she had with anyone in a long time. Most men either dismissed her or looked at her like she was a curiosity, something strange and unnatural. Thomas treated her like an equal. "You really think those raiders will hit Redemption?" she asked. "If they are smart, they will stay far away. 40 miners are a lot of guns to face down." He poured himself more coffee. "But smart and desperate are not always the same thing. If they think there is a big strike up there, they might try something foolish." "Is there a big strike?" "Not that I have heard, but rumors spread fast in mining country. Someone finds a good vein, and within a week, everyone for 100 miles knows about it, usually with the details all twisted up." Willa thought about Redemption, about the families who lived there, the children who ran between the tents and rough cabins. "We have to make sure they are warned." "We will." Thomas looked at her across the fire, his face half in shadow. "You care about the people on your route. They depend on me. Letters from home, news from the outside world. Sometimes I am the only person they see in weeks." She wrapped her hands around her tin cup, feeling the warmth seep into her fingers. "My father used to say that connection was what kept people human out here. Without it, the loneliness could eat you alive." He sounds like he was a wise man. "He was a dreamer who never learned when to stop chasing the next thing, but he loved us, and he understood people." Willa stared into the fire. "I just wish he had been better at taking care of himself." "You are taking care of things now. He would be proud of you." The certainty in Thomas's voice made her look up. "You do not know that?" "Yes, I do. Any father would be proud of a daughter who rides through Devil's Canyon to deliver the mail, who does not quit even when everyone says she should." They fell quiet, and Willa felt the weight of the day settling into her bones. Thomas banked the fire and they moved inside the shack, each taking a side with the old blankets. It was not exactly proper, a man and woman spending the night alone together, but propriety seemed less important than survival out here. "Willa," Thomas said into the darkness. "Yes. If we run into trouble tomorrow, you stay behind me. I have been in more than my share of fights, and I would not forgive myself if something happened to you. I can take care of myself. I know you can, but let me help anyway." She heard the plea beneath the words, the genuine concern, and something inside her softened. "All right. Thank you." Sleep came slowly, and when it did, Willa dreamed of riding through endless canyons, always searching for something just out of reach. She woke before dawn to find Thomas already up, saddling the horses in the gray pre-dawn light. They drank cold coffee left from the night before and set out for Redemption as the sun broke over the eastern horizon. The ride took 3 hours, climbing into rougher country where pine trees appeared between the rocks and the air grew cooler. Redemption sat in a narrow valley, a sprawl of tents and cabins clustered around a creek that ran year-round. Smoke rose from morning fires, and Willa could hear the ring of pickaxes against stone. They rode into camp and were immediately surrounded by curious miners. Willa recognized several of them, men she had delivered mail to before. She asked for the camp leader, a grizzled prospector named Samuel York who had been mining these hills for 20 years. York listened to their warning with a grave expression. "Raiders, you say? How many?" "5, according to the Murphy brothers," Thomas said. "They hit their claim last night, stole supplies and horses. Murphy's pulling out. They were packing when we left them." York spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Damn shame. They were good people." He looked around at the assembled miners. "All right, boys," you heard them. "We double the watch, keep our guns close. Anyone sees strangers, you raise the alarm." One of the younger miners, a kid barely old enough to shave, spoke up. "You think they will really come here, Mr. York? Hope they do not. But hope is not a plan." York turned to Willa. "You have our mail, Miss Vaughn." She distributed the letters and parcels, watching faces light up as men received news from home. One miner got a letter from his wife back in Ohio and had to step away, his eyes wet. Another received a package from his mother containing socks she had knitted and a tin of cookies. These small connections, these threads linking the mining camp to the wider world, this was why Willa rode through dangerous country. She and Thomas stayed in Redemption through the midday meal, accepting the miners' hospitality. York insisted they eat, and soon they were sitting on stumps near the creek, plates piled with beans and salt pork and biscuits that were only a little burned. "You two make a good team," York observed, watching them. "Langford, I heard you were foreman at the Double R. You thinking about giving that up to deliver mail?" Thomas laughed. "No, sir. I just thought Miss Vaughn could use some company on her route, what with the trouble going around. She has been riding it alone for months. Girl has more grit than most men I know." York looked at Willa with approval. "Your father would have been proud, Willa. Sam Vaughn was a friend of mine back in the day. You knew my father, sure did. We prospected together for a spell, must have been 15 years ago. He was always talking about his little girl, how smart you were, how you could outride most boys your age." York's weathered face creased in a smile. "Sam had his faults, but he loved his family something fierce." Willa felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back. "Thank you for telling me that." They left Redemption in the early afternoon, with promises from York to send word if the raiders showed up. The ride back was quieter, both of them tired from the long hours in the saddle. They followed a different route, one that avoided the most dangerous passages but added time to the journey. As the sun started its descent toward the western mountains, Thomas spoke. "I meant what I said, you know, about you being the bravest person I know." Willa glanced at him. "You said that before. I know. I wanted to make sure you heard me." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I have been watching you, Willa. Not in a strange way, but whenever I was in town and you came riding in with that mail satchel, covered in dust, looking like you had been through hell but still standing. You made me think about what it means to be brave. It is not about not being afraid. It is about being afraid and doing it anyway." "I am afraid most of the time," Willa admitted. "Every time I ride through Devil's Canyon, every time I cross those flats. But the people on my route need their mail, and I need the money, and I would rather be afraid than give up. That is what makes you extraordinary." The word hung in the air between them, and Willa felt her heart beating faster. She had spent so long focused on just surviving, just getting through each day, that she had not allowed herself to think about things like romance or courtship. But looking at Thomas now, seeing the admiration and something deeper in his eyes, she wondered if maybe she had been missing something important. "Thomas," she began, not sure what she wanted to say. He held up a hand. "You do not have to say anything. I just wanted you to know that I see you, really see you, and I think you are remarkable." They rode on as the sky turned from blue to gold to purple, arriving in Cherry Creek, just as the lamps were being lit in windows along the main street. Willa returned to the post office, delivering the last of the outgoing mail to Postmaster Clemens, who was relieved to see her back safely. "Heard about the trouble at the Murphy claim," Clemens said. "You should not have been out there alone." "She was not alone," Thomas said from the doorway. "I rode with her." Clemens looked between them, a knowing expression crossing his face. "Well, that is good then. Willa, your mother stopped by earlier asking about you, told her you would be back by nightfall." Willa thanked him and left the post office, suddenly aware of how tired she was, how every muscle ached. Thomas walked with her toward her house, leading both horses. "You do not have to walk me home," Willa said. "I want to." They walked in silence through the quiet streets. Cherry Creek was not a large town, maybe 300 people, and everyone seemed to know everyone else's business. By tomorrow, the whole town would know that Thomas Langford had ridden out with Willa Vaughn, had spent the night in a lined shack with her. The gossips would have a field day. "People will talk," Willa said. "Let them. It could cause trouble for you." Thomas stopped, turning to face her. "Willa, I have been trying to find the courage to talk to you for 6 months. Every time I saw you in town, I wanted to say something, but you always seemed like you were in a hurry, like you had more important things to do. And I figured you probably did not want some cowboy bothering you. But then I heard about the raiders, and I realized I could not just stand by and hope you would be safe. I had to do something." "Why?" Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Because somewhere between seeing you ride through town the first time and watching you deliver mail to miners who look at you like you hung the moon, I fell in love with you." The declaration stunned her into silence. She stared at him, trying to process the words, the sincerity in his face. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. "Thomas, you barely know me. I know enough. I know you are brave and kind and stubborn as hell. I know you care about people, even strangers you only see once a month when you deliver their mail. I know you took on impossible work to take care of your mother, and you have not complained once, even though everyone in this town thinks you are crazy." He took a step closer. "I know that when I am with you, I feel like I could take on the whole world." And I know that I want to spend as much time as possible getting to know everything else about you, if you will let me." Willa's mind raced. Part of her wanted to pull back, to protect herself from the possibility of being hurt. But a larger part, the part that had ridden through dangerous country day after day, the part that refused to quit, wanted to take this chance. "I do not know how to do this," she said honestly. "Romance, courtship, whatever you want to call it. I have been so focused on surviving that I have not thought about living. Then we will figure it out together." He reached out, his hand gentle on her arm. "I am not asking you to marry me tomorrow, Willa. I am just asking for a chance." She thought about the way he had ridden out to find her, worried for her safety. The way he had treated her as an equal, respected her choices. The way he looked at her like she was something precious and strong all at once. "All right," she said. "A chance." His smile could have lit the whole town. "Thank you." They reached her house, a small clapboard structure that needed paint and new shingles. Her mother was waiting by the window, and Willa saw the curtain fall back into place as they approached. "I should go in," Willa said. "Can I see you again? Maybe take you to dinner tomorrow evening." "I would like that." Thomas touched his hat brim in that same gesture he had used when they first met that day, but this time it felt different, charged with promise. Willa watched him ride away, then turned to face her mother's questions. Martha Vaughn was a small woman made smaller by years of hardship, but her eyes were sharp and missed nothing. She took one look at Willa's face and smiled. "So, Thomas Langford finally worked up the nerve to court you." Willa blinked. "You knew." "Everyone knows, dear. That boy has been mooning over you for months. I was starting to wonder if he would ever do anything about it." Martha pulled Willa into the house, already firing off questions about the trip, the raiders, and what exactly Thomas had said. Willa answered as best she could, feeling strange and light and terrified all at once. She had spent so long being strong, being independent, that the idea of letting someone in felt both wonderful and frightening. That night, lying in bed, she touched her lips and wondered what it would be like to kiss Thomas Langford. The thought made her blush in the darkness, but it also made her smile. The next few weeks fell into a new rhythm. Willa continued riding her mail route, but now Thomas accompanied her whenever he could spare time from the ranch. On the days he could not ride with her, she found herself missing his presence, the easy conversation and comfortable silences. They had dinner together twice a week, usually at the boarding house restaurant where the food was decent and the price reasonable. Thomas told her about growing up in Texas, about his complicated relationship with his father, a wealthy rancher who had expected Thomas to marry a specific girl from a prominent family and take over the family business. Thomas had refused, wanting to make his own choices, and the resulting argument had driven him west. Willa talked about her father, about the good memories mixed with the frustration of watching him chase dreams that always seemed to slip through his fingers. She talked about her mother, who had been a schoolteacher before marrying Sam Vaughn and who now took in sewing to make ends meet. She talked about her fears and her hopes, things she had never shared with anyone. One evening in early June, they were walking along the creek that ran south of town, enjoying the cooler air and the sound of water over stones. Thomas reached for her hand, and after a moment of hesitation, Willa let him take it. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and solid, and the touch sent a flutter through her stomach. "I have been thinking," Thomas said, "about the future. What about it? About what I want from it, where I want to be, who I want to be with." He stopped walking, turning to face her. The setting sun cast golden light across his features. "Willa, I love you. I think I have loved you since the first time I saw you ride into town with dust in your hair and determination in your eyes." And I know we have not been courting long, but I am not getting any younger, and I do not see any point in waiting when I already know what I want." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Thomas, what are you saying?" He dropped to one knee right there beside the creek, still holding her hand. "I am saying I want to marry you, Willa Vaughn. I want to build a life with you, support your dreams, ride beside you for as long as you will have me. I do not have a fancy ring yet, but I have a good job, some money saved, and a heart that is completely yours if you want it." Tears spilled down Willa's cheeks before she could stop them. She had never imagined this, never let herself hope for something so good. "I am not an easy person to be with. I am stubborn and independent, and I am not giving up my male route. I would never ask you to. I fell in love with who you are, not who I want you to be. I do not know how to be a wife. I do not know how to be a husband. We will learn together." She looked at him, this man who had seen her at her dustiest and most difficult and still thought she hung the moon. This man who believed in her, who respected her strength instead of being threatened by it. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking on the word. "Yes, I will marry you." Thomas stood and pulled her into his arms, and Willa discovered that kissing him was even better than she had imagined. His lips were gentle at first, then more insistent, and she felt like she was falling and flying all at once. They married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church in Cherry Creek. Martha cried happy tears, and half the town showed up, including Postmaster Clemens and Samuel York, who rode down from Redemption with a handful of miners to see Miss Vaughn married. "You better treat her right, Langford," York told Thomas gruffly, "or you will have 40 armed miners to answer to." Thomas laughed. "I intend to spend the rest of my life treating her like the treasure she is." They moved into a small house Thomas had been renting on the edge of town, and Willa continued her mail route. Thomas, with the blessing of the double Articus owner, adjusted his schedule so he could ride with her at least twice a week. On the days he could not come, he worried, and Willa found it both annoying and endearing. The raiders who had hit the Murphy claim were caught in July, trying to rob a payroll wagon outside of Elko. It turned out they were just desperate men who had heard rumors of strikes and thought they could steal their way to fortune. They had never intended real violence, but desperation made people do foolish things. Life settled into a comfortable pattern. Willa rode her routes, Thomas worked the ranch, and in the evenings they sat together on their small porch, talking about their days and making plans for the future. Martha visited often, delighted to see her daughter happy and in love. In September, Willa realized she was pregnant. The discovery terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. She told Thomas one evening after dinner, watching his face carefully to gauge his reaction. His whoop of joy could probably be heard in the next county. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing, then carefully set her down as if she might break. "Are you happy?" she asked. "Happy? Willa, I am the luckiest man alive." He placed his hand gently on her stomach, which did not show anything yet. "We are going to have a baby." "I am still riding my route," Willa said firmly. "I know. I am serious, Thomas. I am not giving it up just because I am pregnant. I know," he repeated, smiling. "But maybe, when you start to show, we can talk about me taking over the more dangerous parts of the route. Just temporarily." It was a reasonable compromise, and Willa agreed. She rode through her 4th month, then reluctantly let Thomas take over Devil's Canyon and the northern camps, while she handled the closer, safer deliveries. Postmaster Clemens hired a temporary rider to help with the increased workload, a young man from California who reminded Willa of herself when she first started, all nervous energy and determination. In March 1883, Willa gave birth to a son they named Samuel, after her father. He had Thomas's blue-gray eyes and Willa's stubborn chin. And from the first moment she held him, Willa understood a whole new dimension of love. Martha helped during the first difficult weeks, and Thomas proved to be a natural father, patient and gentle with the baby even when Samuel cried for hours. Willa took 2 months off from the mail route, the longest she had been away from it since she started, and found she missed the work, the connection to the people scattered across the territory. When Samuel was 3 months old, Willa approached Postmaster Clemens about returning to work. They worked out a new arrangement where she rode the route 3 days a week instead of 6, handling the closer deliveries while the young Californian, whose name was Peter, took the longer, more dangerous runs. It was not perfect, but it allowed Willa to keep her hand in the work she loved while still being present for her son. Thomas supported her completely, even when other women in town clucked their tongues and said a mother should stay home with her baby. Willa ignored them, secure in the knowledge that she was doing what was right for her family. The years passed in a blur of activity and joy. Samuel grew into a bright, curious toddler who loved horses and wanted to go everywhere with his mother. Willa sometimes took him on the safer deliveries, strapping him into a special saddle Thomas had rigged up, and Samuel would laugh and point at everything they passed. In 1885, Willa became pregnant again. This time she knew what to expect, and while the pregnancy was harder than the first, she handled it with her usual determination. In November, she gave birth to a daughter they named Caroline. Where Samuel was loud and boisterous, Caroline was quiet and observant, watching everything with serious dark eyes. Thomas was promoted to part owner of the Double R Ranch in 1886, the previous owner retiring and selling Thomas a share of the operation. It meant more responsibility, but also more money and security. They bought a larger house with room for the growing family and space for Martha, who had started having trouble with her lungs and needed more care. Willa cut back her mail route hours further, eventually transitioning to just 1 or 2 days a week, focusing on the local deliveries and mentoring Peter, who had proven himself a capable and reliable rider. The Territorial Mail Service recognized her years of service in 1887, presenting her with a commendation for bravery and dedication that she framed and hung in their living room. On warm summer evenings, Willa and Thomas would sit on their porch, watching Samuel and Caroline play in the yard while the sun set over the mountains. Thomas would reach for her hand, lacing their fingers together, and Willa would lean against his shoulder, feeling utterly content. "Do you ever regret it?" Thomas asked one evening. Giving up so much of the route, Willa thought about it, really considered the question. There were moments when she missed the solitude of the long rides, the satisfaction of crossing dangerous ground and delivering mail to people who desperately needed that connection. But when she looked at her children, at the man she loved, at the life they had built together, regret seemed like the wrong word. "No," she said. "I miss it sometimes, but I do not regret it. You and the children, this life we have made, it is more than I ever imagined possible." "You know what I think about sometimes," Thomas said. "That day I rode out to find you on the flats. If I had not gone, if I had just stayed at the ranch like I was supposed to, we might never have had this conversation. You might still just be the brave male rider, and I would still be the fool who was too scared to talk to you. You were never a fool, and I was never just a male rider." She squeezed his hand. "I was a woman trying to survive, to take care of her mother, to prove she was more than what people expected. Finding you, building this life, it did not make me less of who I was. It made me more." "You made me more too," Thomas said softly. "Everything good in my life started when I met you." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to purple to the deep blue of twilight. Martha called from inside that dinner was ready, and they could hear Samuel and Caroline arguing over a toy. It was ordinary, domestic, and absolutely perfect. The years continued their steady march. Samuel started school, proving to be as stubborn about learning as his mother had been about everything else. Caroline developed a love for books, reading everything she could get her hands on. Martha's health declined slowly but steadily, and she passed peacefully in her sleep in the winter of 1889, with Willa holding her hand. Willa mourned her mother deeply, but also felt grateful for the years they had together, for the way Martha had gotten to know her grandchildren and see her daughter happy. They buried Martha in the Cherry Creek Cemetery, next to the plot where Sam Vaughn rested, reuniting them in death as they had been in life. The mail route evolved with the times. In 1890, the Territorial Postal Service reorganized, creating more structured routes and hiring additional riders. Willa officially retired from regular service, though she occasionally filled in when someone was sick or injured. Peter eventually became the head rider for the region, and he always credited Willa with teaching him everything he knew about surviving the dangerous country. Thomas expanded his role at the Double R, eventually becoming the majority owner when his partner retired in 1892. The ranch prospered under his management, and he became known throughout Nevada as a fair employer and savvy businessman. But no matter how busy he got, he always made time for his family, never missing Samuel's school events or Caroline's piano recitals. In 1893, Samuel turned 10 and declared he wanted to learn to rope cattle like his father. Thomas taught him patiently, and soon Samuel was spending his free time at the ranch, learning the business from the ground up. Caroline, now 8, showed no interest in ranching but developed a passion for writing, filling notebook after notebook with stories and observations. One evening, as Willa watched Thomas teaching Samuel how to mend a fence while Caroline sat nearby reading, she felt overwhelmed by gratitude for the life they had built. It had not been easy, and there had been hard times and heartbreak along the way, but standing here in the warm summer twilight with her family around her, Willa could not imagine wanting anything different. Thomas caught her watching and smiled, that same smile that had made her heart flutter years ago beside the creek when he proposed. Time had added lines to his face and gray to his hair, but to Willa, he would always be the cowboy who rode out to find her, who called her brave and meant it. "What are you thinking about?" he asked later when the children were in bed and they were alone on the porch. "How lucky I am. How grateful." "I am the lucky one," Thomas insisted, as he had 1,000 times before. "We both are," Willa said, settling the argument as she always did. They rocked in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the desert, the distant call of coyotes and the whisper of wind through the sage. Somewhere out there, riders were still delivering mail through dangerous country, connecting people across vast distances. Willa had been one of them, had proven herself on routes no man would ride, had earned the respect of miners and cowboys and everyone who knew her story. But this, sitting here with the man she loved, knowing their children slept safely inside, building a life based on respect and partnership and deep abiding love, this was her greatest achievement. Not because she had given up her independence or sacrificed her dreams, but because she had found someone who valued those things about her, who loved her not despite her strength but because of it. In 1895, the Territorial Postal Service asked Willa to speak at a ceremony honoring long-serving mail carriers. She stood before a crowd of postal workers, politicians, and citizens, feeling nervous but determined. She talked about her years on the route, about the people she had served, about what it meant to connect isolated communities to the wider world. "Someone once told me I was the bravest person he knew," Willa said, glancing at Thomas in the audience. "At the time, I did not believe him. I was just doing what needed to be done, the same as anyone would. But over the years, I have learned that bravery is not about being fearless. It is about acknowledging your fear and doing what is right anyway. It is about showing up day after day, even when the work is hard and the way is dangerous. And it is about building connections between people and places, between hearts and homes." The audience applauded, and several newspapers ran stories about the brave male rider of Cherry Creek. Willa kept the clippings in a scrapbook, more for her children than for herself, so they would understand the work their mother had done before they were born. Samuel grew into a capable young man who loved ranching as much as his father did. By the time he was 16, he was working full-time at the Double R, learning every aspect of the business. Caroline's writing talent earned her a scholarship to a boarding school in San Francisco, and though Willa missed her terribly, she was proud that her daughter had the opportunities she herself had never had. In 1898, Thomas and Willa celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner at home. They had talked about doing something elaborate, maybe traveling to San Francisco to visit Caroline, but in the end, they preferred the simplicity of being together. 15 years, Thomas mused, refilling their wine glasses. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like I have loved you my whole life." "You are getting sentimental in your old age," Willa teased, though she was touched by the words. "I am not old. I am distinguished. You have gray in your beard. You have gray in your hair. And I wear it well," Willa said, making him laugh. They talked late into the night, reminiscing about their years together, the challenges they had faced and overcome. The time Samuel had fallen out of a tree and broken his arm. The terrible winter of 1891, when snow trapped them in the house for a week. The year the ranch almost went under due to drought, and how they had pulled through by sheer determination and help from neighbors. Through it all, they had relied on each other, partners in the truest sense. Thomas had never tried to change Willa or make her into something she was not, and Willa had supported Thomas's ambitions while pursuing her own interests. It was not a perfect marriage, but it was a real one, built on honesty and respect and genuine love. In 1900, as the new century dawned, Samuel announced his engagement to a young woman named Rebecca Hayes, whose father owned a neighboring ranch. The wedding was planned for that summer, and Willa threw herself into preparations, grateful for Caroline's help when she came home from school. The wedding was beautiful, held at the ranch under a bright June sky. Willa cried watching her son pledge his life to Rebecca, seeing in them echoes of her own wedding day nearly 20 years earlier. Thomas stood beside her, his arm around her waist, and whispered, "We did good, raising that boy." "We did," Willa agreed, her heart full. Caroline graduated from her boarding school in 1902 and returned to Nevada with plans to start a newspaper in Cherry Creek. She had inherited her mother's determination and her father's business sense, and within a year, the Cherry Creek Chronicle was a thriving operation. Caroline wrote articles about local events, profiled interesting residents, and advocated for women's rights and education reform. Willa could not have been prouder if Caroline had become president. Watching her daughter use her talents to make a difference in the community, Willa saw a continuation of the work she herself had done, connecting people and bringing the outside world closer. In 1903, Samuel and Rebecca had their first child, a daughter they named Willa after her grandmother. When Willa held her granddaughter for the first time, she felt the circle of life complete itself in the most profound way. This tiny girl would grow up in a world shaped by the choices Willa had made, the routes she had ridden, the barriers she had broken. Thomas retired from active management of the Double R in 1905, turning most of the daily operations over to Samuel while remaining a part owner. He was 60 now, still strong and capable but ready to slow down and enjoy more time with Willa. They traveled some, visiting San Francisco and seeing places they had never had time for when they were younger. But they always came back to Cherry Creek, to the house they had made a home, to the community where they were respected and loved. Willa kept a hand in the Postal Service, serving on an advisory board that helped shape mail routes across the growing state. Nevada had achieved statehood years ago, and the wild frontier was slowly being tamed. But there were still remote areas that needed connection, still brave riders willing to go where others would not. One warm September afternoon in 1908, Willa and Thomas rode out to the old line shack where they had spent their first night together. It was abandoned now, falling into ruin, but they sat on the remains of the porch and looked out at the landscape they both loved. "You remember that night?" Thomas asked. "Every detail," Willa said. "I was so nervous, trying to pretend I was not, and you were trying so hard to be respectful and proper. I was terrified I would say something wrong and ruin my chance with you. You called me the bravest person you knew. How could I resist that?" Thomas took her hand, his grip still strong despite the arthritis that plagued him some mornings. "You were brave. You are brave. Everything I said then was true. And you were the cowboy who saw past what everyone else saw, who loved me for exactly who I was." Willa leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. "I do not know what I did to deserve you, Thomas Langford, but I am grateful every day." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun moved across the sky, marking time as it had since they were young and foolish and brave enough to take chances on love. The landscape had not changed much, still vast and harsh and beautiful, still testing anyone who tried to make a life there. But Willa and Thomas had changed, grown older and wiser, their love deepened by years of partnership and shared experiences. They had raised good children who were now raising children of their own. They had built a life that mattered, contributed to their community, made a difference in small but meaningful ways. As they rode back toward town in the gathering twilight, Willa thought about the young woman she had been, riding alone through Devil's Canyon with her leather mail satchel and her determination. That woman would be proud of who she had become, not because she had married or had children or helped build a successful ranch, but because she had stayed true to herself while embracing love and partnership. "What are you smiling about?" Thomas asked. "Just thinking about how far we have come." "We have come a good distance," Thomas agreed. "And if I am very lucky, we still have a long way to go together." "I am counting on it," Willa said. In 1910, Cherry Creek held a celebration honoring its oldest residents and longest-serving community members. Willa and Thomas were both recognized, Willa for her pioneering mail route service and Thomas for his contributions to the local economy and cattle industry. They stood together on the stage in the town square, holding hands while the current mayor read their commendations. Later, at the reception, young women approached Willa to thank her for showing them what was possible. One girl, barely 18, said she was planning to apply for a job with the Postal Service, inspired by Willa's example. Willa encouraged her, offering advice and warning her about the challenges she would face, but also telling her the rewards were worth it. "The world needs brave women," Willa told the girl. "Women who are willing to do hard things, to go where others will not, to prove that we are just as capable as any man. Do not let anyone tell you that you cannot do something just because you are a woman." The girl left with tears in her eyes and fire in her heart, and Willa felt satisfied that the legacy she was leaving went beyond her own achievements. Thomas's health began to decline in 1912. Nothing dramatic, but a slow wearing down of a body that had worked hard for 6 decades. He developed a persistent cough that worried Willa, though the doctor assured them it was just the dry desert air affecting his lungs. Thomas continued to work at the ranch a few hours a day, refusing to become idle, but he tired more easily now. Willa took care of him with the same determination she had brought to everything else in her life, making sure he rested, ate well, and did not push himself too hard. Samuel and Rebecca helped, and little Willa, now 9 years old, visited often to read to her grandfather from the books Caroline sent from the newspaper office. In the spring of 1913, Thomas caught pneumonia. He fought it stubbornly for 2 weeks, but his weakened lungs could not fight off the infection. On a warm May evening, with Willa holding his hand and Samuel standing at the foot of the bed, Thomas Langford drew his last breath and slipped peacefully away. Willa was shattered. They had been together for 30 years, partners in every sense, and losing him felt like losing part of herself. She had ridden through dangerous country, faced down raiders and crossed impassable terrain, but nothing had prepared her for this final parting. The funeral was the largest Cherry Creek had ever seen. Cowboys from the Double R stood shoulder to shoulder with postal workers, miners from Redemption, storekeepers and ranchers, and everyone whose lives Thomas had touched. They buried him in the town cemetery, and Willa stood beside the grave with her children and grandchildren gathered around her, finding strength in the family they had created together. Samuel spoke at the service, his voice breaking as he talked about his father. "He taught me what it means to be a man, not through lectures or rules, but through example. He showed me how to work hard, how to treat people with respect, how to love deeply and without reservation. He loved my mother with everything he had, and she loved him the same way. That love shaped our family and made us who we are." Caroline read a piece she had written for the newspaper, a tribute to Thomas that captured his kindness, his integrity, his quiet strength. "My father was not a famous man," she read. "He never held political office or achieved great wealth or had his name in history books. But he changed the world by changing the people around him, by being good and decent and true. He saw the best in everyone, especially my mother, and he spent his life proving that he was worthy of her love." Willa could barely see through her tears, but she felt surrounded by love, by the community Thomas had helped build, by the family they had raised together. She would survive this, the same way she had survived every other challenge life had thrown at her. She would grieve and mourn and miss him every day for the rest of her life, but she would continue on, because that was what Thomas would want. In the months after Thomas's death, Willa threw herself into work at the newspaper, helping Caroline and writing occasional articles about the early days of Cherry Creek and the postal routes. She spent time with her grandchildren, now numbering 3 as Samuel and Rebecca had added a son and another daughter to their family. She volunteered with the church and the women's auxiliary and kept herself busy enough that the loneliness did not consume her. But every evening, when she sat alone on the porch of the house they had shared, she felt his absence like a physical ache. She would look out at the mountains they had loved and remember riding beside him, his easy smile and steady presence. She would remember the first time he told her she was brave, the night he proposed, their wedding day, the births of their children, 1,000 small moments that added up to a life well lived. Samuel managed the ranch with the same care and competence Thomas had shown, and Willa was grateful that the business they had built would continue for another generation. Caroline's newspaper thrived, becoming an important voice in the region and giving Caroline a platform to advocate for the causes she believed in. Both children made Willa proud, and she knew Thomas would have felt the same. In 1915, on what would have been their 33rd wedding anniversary, Willa rode out to the old line shack one more time. She was 65 now, her hair completely gray, her body showing the wear of a lifetime of hard work. But she could still sit a horse, and Ginger's granddaughter carried her steadily across the familiar terrain. She sat in the same spot where she and Thomas had sat years ago, remembering that night when they were young and everything was ahead of them. She talked to him as if he could hear her, telling him about the grandchildren, about Samuel's success at the ranch, about Caroline's latest editorial that had stirred up the town council. "I miss you," she said to the empty air. "Every single day I miss you. But I am grateful for every moment we had together. You made me better, Thomas. You made my life better. And I hope, wherever you are, you know that I loved you with everything I had." A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermal currents, and Willa took it as a sign. Thomas had always loved watching the hawks, said they were the freest creatures on earth. Maybe he was that free now, released from the constraints of mortality, soaring above the landscape they had both loved. Willa lived another 8 years, remaining active and engaged until the very end. She saw her grandchildren grow, watched little Willa become a teacher, saw Samuel's son take his first job at the ranch. She attended Caroline's wedding to a newspaper editor from Reno and danced at the reception despite her arthritic knees. In 1923, the state of Nevada held a ceremony honoring pioneers who had helped shape the state. Willa was invited to speak, and at 73 she stood before a crowd and talked about the early days, about delivering mail through territory so dangerous that men refused to ride it, about the communities she had helped connect, about the love she had found along the way. "I was never supposed to be brave," she told the audience. "I was just a woman trying to take care of her mother, trying to survive in a hard land. But someone saw something in me I did not see in myself." A cowboy named Thomas Langford rode out to find me one day, rode with me through dangerous country, and told me I was the bravest person he knew. I did not believe him at first, but he kept believing in me until I learned to believe in myself. He showed me that bravery is not about being fearless. It is about loving fiercely, working hard, and showing up every day to do what needs doing. That is the lesson I want to leave with you. Be brave in your own lives. Love deeply. Show up. Do the work. And along the way, maybe you will discover you are stronger than you ever imagined. The crowd gave her a standing ovation, and Willa felt Thomas's presence so strongly it was as if he stood beside her. She had lived a good life, a full life, rich in love and purpose and meaning. She had been blessed beyond measure, and she was grateful for every moment. Willa Vaughn Langford passed away peacefully in her sleep on a cold January night in 1924. She was buried beside Thomas in the Cherry Creek Cemetery, their graves marked with simple headstones that bore their names and the dates of their lives. At the funeral, Samuel read from a letter his father had written to Willa years ago, a letter she had kept in a box with other treasures. "My dearest Willa," Samuel read, his voice thick with emotion. "I am writing this because sometimes the things we feel are too big for everyday conversation. I want you to know that you are the bravest person I have ever known. Not because you ride through dangerous country or refuse to quit when things get hard, though those things are true. You are brave because you love with your whole heart, because you show up for the people who need you, because you keep going even when you are afraid. You make me want to be better, to work harder, to love more deeply. You are my partner, my best friend, my greatest adventure. Whatever happens in this life, I want you to know that loving you has been the best thing I ever did. You are extraordinary, Willa Vaughn, and I am the luckiest man alive to call you mine. Forever yours, Thomas." There was not a dry eye in the church. The story of Willa and Thomas had become part of Cherry Creek's history, a tale told to children and grandchildren about the brave male rider and the cowboy who loved her. Their love had shaped the community in ways large and small, had shown people what partnership and respect and deep abiding love could look like. Samuel and Caroline both lived long lives, carrying forward the values their parents had instilled. Samuel ran the double R until his own son was ready to take over, and the ranch remained in the family for generations. Caroline's newspaper continued to serve the community for decades, and she never stopped fighting for the causes she believed in, always crediting her mother's example for teaching her to be brave. Little Willa, named after her grandmother, became a prominent educator who traveled across Nevada establishing schools in remote communities. She carried on her grandmother's legacy of connection, making sure that children in isolated areas had access to education and opportunity. She told everyone who would listen about the grandmother who had delivered mail through land no man would ride, who had shown that women could be just as brave and capable as anyone. The story of Willa Vaughn Langford became legend in Nevada, told and retold until it took on mythic proportions. But at its heart, it remained a simple truth. A woman had loved deeply and lived bravely, had found a partner who saw her worth and celebrated it, had built a life of meaning and purpose in a harsh land. She had delivered mail through dangerous country, had connected communities, had shown that courage came in many forms, and a cowboy had loved her for exactly who she was, had called her the bravest person he knew, and had spent 30 years proving that he meant it. Their love had been real and true and lasting, a testament to what was possible when two people chose each other every day, through good times and hard times, until death parted them. The land that had tested Willa Vaughn remained wild and beautiful, still challenging anyone who tried to make a life there. But it also held the memory of her rides, the echo of her determination, the legacy of her bravery. And in Cherry Creek, where her story began, people still talked about the male rider who refused to quit, who proved that being a woman did not mean being weak, who showed that love and courage could transform an ordinary life into something extraordinary. The routes she rode were paved now, the dangerous passages tamed by roads and modern transportation. But somewhere in the red rock canyons and across the wide flats, Willa's spirit remained, a reminder that bravery is not about being fearless but about showing up anyway, about doing what needs doing, about loving fiercely and living fully. And in a quiet cemetery on the edge of a small Nevada town, two headstones stood side by side, marking the resting place of Willa Vaughn Langford and Thomas Langford, partners in life and love, whose story would be remembered as long as people told tales of the Wild West and the brave souls who shaped it.